Robert's better half, as a matter of fact.
Before we go on to the military, if I may just interject, because my dog just recently had some surgery, and it is very expensive. She was attacked by a couple other dogs, and so she had to have staples and everything else. But you bring up a very good point, Laura, that for the elderly, whether it's the male or the female that's left out of a marriage and the husband or one of them has died, that's all they have left. And maybe they don't have any children in the area, out of state, whatever. And their commitment to that animal is just like a child. And when that animal gets sick, they may not have the money. And that's a real problem that's going on in today's economy. So I think when you start talking about a 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization that we in the community can contribute to, and that would include food and everything else, I think it's very altruistic, and I'm looking forward to Laura and you talking about that in the future.
Well, the food is so expensive now. We picked up a 3-pound bag of food at Walmart last night, and it used to be somewhere around $14. It was $17 now, so it's gone up quite a bit. So, and that's, as Robert's saying, that's tough on older individuals and on a fixed income. I mean, we see that so much going to different places. Like we went out to Sullivan's house today. She's out of Sullivan's house doing dog care and cat care out there, and you see that with those folks. They just don't have the money. And I mean, some of these vaccines are, a couple of $100 a shot.
It's true.
And you do any kind of surgery, it's very expensive, particularly if you have to anesthetize them. That's when you get into the expense. And her expenses are just about the same as a little bit more expensive, because she does charge a service call for driving out there. So it's very expensive, and it's very expensive for these people. So, in the future we'll talk about the 501c3, but I think it's important that she's establishing that and seeing that those people get some kind of service for free.
I do too, and you find, in addition to elderly people, you have other people that are isolated for whatever reason, people that have therapy animals, that type of thing. And, frequently there is assistance to buy food for humans, and we have medical insurance and, various programs. Your children aren't going to go without medical care. But even with pet insurance, I have pet insurance, but it doesn't cover stuff like human insurance does.
No, it doesn't.
And there aren't generally a lot of programs for animal food, and for some people, their animals, that's their lifeline. It really is, and so it's very important that we take care of them. Animals give a lot to humans.
They're such good company. Look at what
support.
Dagny brings to Robert. I mean, otherwise, his whole life would be devoid of any kind of touch, and he gets that from Dagny. So I'm thinking about dropping an old cat over there sometime.
Oh yeah, that's gonna happen.
Yeah, Dagny'd love it if you brought him a cat.
Oh yes, Dagny would love a cat.
And Laura has plenty of them
We got cats.
at her estate, I can tell you that.
So that's one of the things we did in our neighborhood, was we rounded up all the feral cats and had them neutered. And so now they're friendly. They hang out. They're porch cats. We feed them. They have shelter, but they're not breeding anymore. 6 of them are cute. 60 of them can become a problem. But
it is.
All the animals get along.
She does spays and neuters for those feral cats, and that's a whole nother adventure when you go out to do that. She brought 4 cats back. She was the operations officer for Guantanamo Bay 2 years ago now, and she was down there for almost a year, and she brought back 4 Cuban cats. And they're all 4 communists. Everyone. They expect you to do everything for them. Feed me, feed me, feed me.
That's every cat.
Take care of them. No, these are particularly, they're definitely communists, for sure.
Yes.
They've got their own Politburo in their house. So it's a hierarchy as well.
Yeah, well, I don't think Robert or Dagny are giving up that kind of control to bring a cat in, because they quickly established dominance
They do.
in the house.
That's
We've
true.
completely lost control of our house with my 3 little ones. Well, so let's talk about your military career. Let's start with your military career. What is at this juncture your take on being a career military person. Tell us about some of your
Well,
experiences.
what's happened is, and one of my friends, Potsy Weber, who used to be the commanding officer of the USS Kennedy, Potsy Weber asked me today, he said, I have just become the commanding officer of the Hampton Roads Squadron, which is the A&A Squadron, Association of Naval Aviation. And he asked me, so well, I said, how did that happen? I said, Potsy, I can't hear very well, and what they said was, anybody who wants to be the commanding officer of the squadron, step forward. And everybody else in the room stepped backwards, and I stood there because I didn't hear what they said, and I became the CO right then. So that's how that happened. So I'm the new commanding officer. I've been that for 2 months, and what we're trying to do is gradually grow the organization back to what it was several years ago. It used to have about 60 members that would meet, and now we're getting about 20, maybe 30 sometimes. We had the Ukrainian colonel that's at Atlantic Command Transformation, Allied Command Transformation rather, and he came over and gave us a briefing. We had about 35 people then. So we'll get it back up. Today we had a meeting, and we held it at Vista Point at the Naval Station in Norfolk, and we had the helicopter community come over. The Commodore, who was Helicopter Sea Control Wing Atlantic, he came over and gave us a brief on the 3 helicopter communities that he has control of. And it was a very interesting briefing. His career and my career were very much the same. He, as a matter of fact, was in the same company as my daughter, and he's a Naval Academy graduate in 1997, and she's in 1998. He went helicopters, and then she of course, went and flew the E-2 Hawkeye. And so it was kind of nice to get him to come over, and he did a super job explaining, what the 3 communities that, we see these helicopters fly over above us. We see the F-18s fly over above us now. And to realize what's gone on in the Naval Service, what we have done is we have basically drawn down the numbers of types of aircraft down to a smaller amount to help with the logistics of the aircraft and to help with the service of the aircraft. But we've actually added more of the demands of the aircraft in the same. For example, we had several different types of attack aircraft and so on and so forth. Now we just got a fighter aircraft and an attack aircraft and one in the F-18. And we asked it to do a lot, and it pretty much has done what we want it to do. It's a really good airplane. The same thing in the helicopter community. We had H-2s, H-3s, H-53s, H-46s, and all that. And now we've gone down to basically 3 different communities. We've got the helicopter communities, they fly the H-60 version of the aircraft, which is basically an Army Black Hawk. So you've got the Army flying the Black Hawk, you've got the Navy flying what they call the Seahawk, but so much of that aircraft is the same rotor blades, the same gearbox, the same engines and all that, and that creates an ability to focus your logistics better. And we've been able to do that and get the cost of the aircraft down, because I tell you, they are just, aircraft are expensive now. You talk about an airplane that you buy in World War II would be somewhere around $25,000, maybe up to $50,000. Now, these aircraft are, $35 million. The helicopters now are 23, $24 million a piece. And so when you smash one up, it's very expensive. Now that's on the good side. We have actually gotten our accident rate down pretty good because we realized it's too expensive. We couldn't afford the accident rate that we had during World War II, which was phenomenal. We lost a lot of airplanes, lost a lot of aircraft due to training accidents. I was reading about the Germans, and they had a tremendous problem with crashing airplanes in training missions in World War II. One of the reasons that they lost the Battle of Germany, which we were successful in defeating them. And I've read about the fighter pilots over there and how they had to tackle all that stuff when they had probably the most advanced aircraft in the world, which is the ME-262, which is the first real jet combat aircraft in the world. But they were phenomenal. But in the Navy, what we try to do is get those type model series down, and we've produced an aircraft now that has similar rotor blades and all that stuff the same. the internal organs inside the aircraft are different, and so they're able to do different missions. We've gotten rid of a couple of fixed-wing aircraft because of the helicopters, and they're doing the job of the fixed-wing aircraft, and that also produces some economies. And just the basic idea of keeping fewer airplanes on the carrier, we've actually done that. So now we have 2 squadrons of helicopters on the carrier, about 5 airplanes each that are doing different missions for the carrier. And then the carrier now can carry up somewhere around 75 attack aircraft is what they're carrying on board the carrier. So we have expanded the E2 community. It's up to 5 aircraft on the carriers, but you need that because the surveillance of the aircraft is extremely capable. You take a look at an aircraft carrier, and you've got a Hawkeye aboard, an E2 Hawkeye aboard above the carrier, and that airplane can see everything within 250 nautical miles, including a periscope that comes out of the water. It can tell you that it's there. The third thing that the Commodore talked about, Commodore Ted Johnson is his name, and Ted talked about the MQ-3C Fire Scout, and it is a unmanned helicopter. It was a Schweitzer helicopter, which was a small helicopter, but now this is a Bell helicopter, basically a Bell Ranger, that they've stuck a whole bunch of stuff in it and a lot of gas, and that aircraft will stay airborne for up to 15 hours, which is amazing. You know, you just send an airplane up and it flies around and has a radar and it has a FLIR and other stuff, you know, different capabilities that it can carry, and it stays up for 15 hours. So that's an incredible capability in that aircraft.
So that's interesting. And so there are some obvious advantages to having something that doesn't have to be manned. You could perhaps send it where you know you're going to be in danger of losing the people on the plane, obviously, and so you could maybe be more aggressive. On the other hand, I would imagine that piloting it from elsewhere, would that make it less likely to like pivot as needed?
No.
When you need to change direction?
No, the flexibility of the control of the aircraft is pretty dynamic, and they have a lot of different frequencies. The jamming is the thing that you have to be concerned about. Someone jamming all the signals and jamming that particular signal. In that case, the aircraft is already pre-programmed to do the mission profile and then return to where it's got to land, and it automatically lands. You don't have to have, these helicopters automatically have a landing profile and they land themselves, so you don't have to have a pilot doing that, unlike some of the other aircraft. But they're just amazing in the capabilities. And you think about the computers, and we're talking about artificial intelligence. That is artificial intelligence, and that's you know, I mean, we were actually launching aircraft off of destroyers. It was called a dash, and it was basically a 2-engine, a little small helicopter that would carry 2 torpedoes, and we were doing that in the 1950s. The difference was when you launched a dash, everybody took cover because you never knew what was going to happen to it.
Right.
So because it was basically a radio frequency. Now the computerized capability of the aircraft is just so incredible. But you make a point that you don't have to have humans in there. So what you don't do is all the stuff that supports the human anatomy in an aircraft, that all disappears now. And so you can use that to put more fuel in the aircraft, and you can also put a larger computer in the aircraft and more sensors on the aircraft that would be taken up by the human weight and the need for supplying oxygen and so on and other things for the humans in the aircraft. And that gives us a heck of an advantage in the aircraft.
But even without the jamming, so if I'm actually piloting a plane, and the mission when I pull out is XYZ, and then once I'm in the air, I see that maybe things are not as we thought they were, or they've changed drastically. Is there the ability to account for that from somebody manning it from? Okay.
Yes, the ability to do that. And again, there's a default capability in the aircraft where it's totally jammed and it can't receive any signal from the remote pilots on the ground or in the unit that's controlling them. It automatically diverts to whatever it's supposed to do, and it will do that and then come back and return to its own landing spot. So there's several different profiles that you can use to take care of that, and it's just amazing the stuff we do with the aircraft. I mean, it's just amazing. I think what you'll see in the future is we will do more unmanned capability in all of the services, and you'll see soldiers, you'll see mechanical soldiers. I mean, we already have mechanical mules that carry stuff with soldiers, so you'll see mechanical soldiers go into places that a normal soldier or sailor is going to have to worry about going into because they're vulnerable. Well, you send that mechanical drone in there, and it observes, it senses things, and of course it'll be a target as well. The other thing is, that's the kind of a disadvantage, is these things become very valuable, so you don't want to lose them. You don't want to throw them out there. We do have little small drones that we send out, and of course, if we are going after an enemy, we do put a lot of stuff in the air that's inexpensive, that defaults their radar and gives them a false signal. So we do a lot of that with our attack aircraft, and we've done that for years, and we'll do that the same with helicopters. What I think is going to be interesting in the future is one of the more difficult challenges we have is mine sweeping. And somebody goes out with an aircraft or a boat and just drops a mine in the water, that denies that water to us, and we need to be able to take that capability and knock it out. And in order to do that, it's very difficult. You have to own the air, and you have to own the sea, and I think you'll see that being done with unmanned vehicles under the water doing taking care of the mine sweeping. And I think that's something we'll see in the future. But the Commodore had a unique insight into that because he had been the requirements officer for the Fire Scout in Washington, D.C., up in the organization we call N98, which is Navy 98. He was actually the requirements officer for that, so he had a unique insight into that. And I think he saw the future of that as something that is very important. So he also said that our FMC rate is somewhere around, which is full mission capable for the helicopters, is somewhere around 40 to 50%, and the MC rate, which I thought was pretty good, was somewhere around 70%, which means that we're mission capable. We can do the missions we have about 70% of the time with the aircraft that we have, and full mission capable, which is all the systems working, is at least 40 to 50% of the time, and I think that's indicative of the capability that we put in the aircraft and the maintenance that we put in the airplane. You know, the one thing that we do better than any military in the United States is our logistics. And we didn't do it very well in the Revolutionary War, but we learned. And the one thing that we learned, and you saw this particularly on the Union side in the Civil War, was their logistic capability was just phenomenal. And they overwhelmed the South with their ability to move shells, powder, troops, and the ability to give them supplies and food. And the South wasn't able to keep up with that. So logistics is something that we do better than anybody.
Well, I think that you definitely cannot underestimate American ingenuity, for one. And I think that this technology is impressive. I mean, there are so many things you can do now without fear of fatalities because you can send a machine in. However, one of the topics I would like to touch on, because we cannot count on machines to do everything. We still have to have our fighting people there, our men and women and all the branches of service. And one of the areas that is really, really important, I have somebody flashing a Marine logo at me, but is readiness, just general readiness, physical readiness, mental readiness, the training, the capability. And I think historically, the United States has done a pretty good job of that. I do, however, feel that the current trend toward political correctness and DEI could potentially undermine that. I know some of the conversations that you hear, and some of this is, obviously Hollywood stuff, but you see movies where you have a drill instructor really talking down to the new people, and it's always kind of been my impression that you break people down and you build them up. Like, you need people who can follow orders. People die if they don't follow orders. And so I think some of the new, maybe softer touch can undermine that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I know that drill instructors, and I had particularly a close up front uh, time with drill instructors, because when I went through Officer Candidate School, it was manned in Pensacola by Marine Corps drill instructors. Smokey Bear hat, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it was just these guys. Now when we talk about it, it's funny, but it wasn't funny then when you were on the receiving end of all that. And yes, there is a problem with that. I think the important thing is we try to find out who can take the tough stuff and make the hard decisions while they've got their face in the dirt and they've just done 75 push-ups and they're being asked to do 100 and they can't do it, and what they're going to do and how they're going to react to that. And at the same time, what they try to do, and if you remember the movie Officer and a Gentleman.
I do.
Okay. Officer and a Gentleman actually took place, but not up in the Northwest. It took place at Pensacola, Florida. That's where it actually happened. That actually happened at Pensacola, Florida, and the training was like that. It was very intense, and the drill instructor you had, each class had its own drill instructor. Mine was Staff Sergeant E.L. Weeks, who I got to see about 5 years ago, and he retired as Master Sergeant E.L. Weeks, and he was a character, but he was a terrific gentleman and just did a super job, I thought, with us. But because of the things that we were going to do there, we were going to be naval aviators. We were going to have to do some technical stuff. We were going to have to do some hard stuff. We weren't going to be doing physical stuff all the time, but what they wanted to find out was, could you stand the physical training and the mental training and the attention to detail. And the last thing, the most important thing, is they wanted to see if you were a team player. And that is the team building of that. And we could not have succeeded in class 0973 at Pensacola had we not had the team effort, because they would come in. I remember we had a major examination one day, and it was towards the end of the summer where we were going to graduate. And they destroyed the rooms, just absolutely destroyed them. Trash all over. They went up and tore the ceiling out. The Marines came in there and tore the place up. And we had to have after this major test that we had to take, which is an academic test, we had to come back in and get ready for an inspection. Well, we had our rooms all ready for inspection before we went over to the test. We came back, the rooms were destroyed. We had about 30 minutes to get those rooms back in shape. And you couldn't do it unless you had teamwork and the guys working together. And that's the kind of thing they want to see. And, you know, some guys just couldn't do it. Some guys couldn't handle the stress, and they were gone. They would do what they call drop on request, DOR.
Right.
You remember that phrase in Officer and Gentleman,
Sure
DOR.
do.
I'm not going to DOR. Well, a lot of guys did and walked away from that.
So we need to set these people up to be in a position where they are all able to put their lives in each other's hands and feel comfortable doing that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the team is, when you're out there in a team, in a squadron or in a ship or any kind of unit, and Robert is a Marine, and he'll tell you that when you're in a platoon or you're in a battalion or whatever you're in, and I deployed with the Marines, I actually took them out for 11 years. It was the last thing I did when I was in the service. The cohesiveness of that unit is based on the teamwork and their ability to work together, and whether they care for each other or not. And of course, that's, you know, people say, well,
They don't
they're
have
not
to
fighting
like
for the
each other.
country,
They
they're
have
fighting
to
for
trust
each other.
each other.
Yeah, they have to trust each other and care for each other, and that I think is an important thing. And that's what that training builds. It may be harsh and it may be tough, but it's necessary, and I think it's important. The issue is, now, do young people want to do that or not? And of course, Jim Stavridis, who was a good friend, the 4-star that used to be a NATO commander, he just wrote an article where he talked about the problems we're having, and this segues into recruiting. Readiness is always a part of that is recruiting. And you look at the numbers that are down, and all the services are down, but particularly the Army is down 25,000 recruits. That's a large number.
Wow, that is.
That's probably the largest number we've had when we went to the all-volunteer force in the early 70s. And now the Navy is, this year, I think, is down 10,000. Now, we can probably absorb that and make some adjustments with, keeping people on in their enlistments and so on and so forth. But with the all-volunteer force, that is a challenge. The other challenge that we have in this country, which we've had historically, is these kids, some of them aren't capable. They aren't qualified. They aren't in shape enough. They aren't mentally capable. President Truman was concerned about the large number of people in the United States that were not capable of being in the military service because of a physical thing, their teeth, their health, and so on and so forth. And the same thing applies now. You'd think that we would have solved some of that problem here in this country, but it's a problem and particularly for the all-volunteer force, because remember, there is no draft. If you look in this magazine, which is a Vietnam Veterans magazine here called Veteran, one of the things they talk about is national service, that we ought to require people to go into national service, which doesn't just include the military, but the military would be one of the things that you would get for national service. Is you'd be military, Peace Corps, Urban League, whatever the thing might be that you would go to. And there's a huge debate about whether we should have national service. One of the things that you have to understand about that is if you require national service, you're going to have to pay these people to come in and do national service. And one of the things we found out in the Vietnam War is we were bringing people in and they had a 2-year enlistment. Well, you train somebody for 18 months, or some of the training was 18 months, then you had to give them some more time on their enlistment because it wasn't worth the money. A 2-year, you send the guy through Parasol and then he's out in 2 years, you just don't get the money from. Now the service is much longer, and but you have to sign up for schools and so on and so forth, and you extend your enlistment for the service that you're going out for. But it's much more expensive now, and it's still expensive, and it's going to get more expensive, and we have to do that to be competitive with the economy. Right now there's a lot of jobs that are available, so young people aren't turning to the services. So the thing that we have to do is encourage them with pay, with benefits. Robert won't agree with me on benefits, but that's one of the things that we have to do, is to encourage them so that they look at the service and say, you know what, if I do this and serve, I'm eligible for medical benefits for the rest of my life. And that's pretty important with the expenses of medicine now, to have a veteran, and we take care of the medical needs of a veteran for the rest of their life. That's pretty important. And so those things are the kind of things that we need to emphasize. We also remember we had a big uptick in service in the military after 9/11 because people wanted to serve. That has kind of gone away, and so I think we're going to have to do a better job of recruiting to get people to go into service.
So a few observations that I've made, you may agree or disagree. One, you're right, you saw a big surge after 9/11. People felt patriotic. They felt that they wanted to serve. They felt attacked and felt like America was worth fighting for. And some of the rhetoric now is the opposite of that. You have people who don't want to serve, and they're being taught to not like America. That's one. Another is you talked about the physical readiness. I don't recall seeing young people, sometimes they're with older people, but young people as out of shape in general as they are now. We have the Nintendo generation. Like when I was a kid, kids were outside. They ran, they played ball, they rode their bikes. Now kids are spending their time in front of the TV, on their phones, playing video games, but they're sedentary. They're much more sedentary at an earlier age. It used to be you didn't become sedentary until you were older and had an office job. Now they're sedentary in elementary school. And so, of course, by the time they turn 18, when they could enlist, they're already starting to decline physically because they're not getting that physical activity. And thirdly, I'd say, I'm not going to comment on military pay, doing family law, doing bankruptcy, things like that. I've seen some, and there's some up, some down. But the benefits in general for someone whose career, especially, seem pretty good. Educational benefits, medical benefits. That type of thing. I think the benefits are pretty good. Maybe they could be more. You might have a different opinion. Um, Maybe the pay should be a little bit more, because if you want to attract good people for certain, especially particular rates, you might have to do a little bit better on that to compete with the private sector where they could get out. And training's expensive. You can ask people whether they're in government service or private companies. Training is one of your most expensive things. So if you have somebody who's really good, you want to incentivize them to stay. So.
And our training is very expensive. The training that we have to give people is very intense and very expensive. And you just take a look at the average sailor when you send him up to Great Lakes now, him or her up to Great Lakes, you're making a significant investment in that young man or woman. And it's you have to get payback for it. And that's one of the disadvantages, I think, is a service says, look, you're going to stay in for at least 4 years now. And some people don't want to obligate that. They don't realize, as I was amazed to find out, 20 years goes by pretty doggone rapidly, and it's just incredible. And someone could spend now 20 years in the service and get out and get that stipend that you get, for service, and then get another job. I mean, I've just got a friend that was a chief petty officer that got out, and now he's a GS-13, and he's getting the retirement for being 21 years as Navy Chief Petty Officer, and now he's going to get a stipend later on as depends on what he gets out as a GS-14 or 15, but that's a significant amount of money.
Well, and if you go in at a high school, you can have retirement pay before the age of 40 and still build another career. So you
could actually live in West Virginia and not have to pay that much money. Virginia Beach, of course, is a little bit more expensive, but that's a problem for us. But yes, and I think we need to do a better job of advertising. But I think the pay, we have just passed a 5% pay increase across the board for our officers and enlisted, and I think that's important to do that. And we need to do a better job of showing young people, what a military career could be, and I think that's competition, it's advertisement. And we haven't done as good a job as we could have done, I think, and that's probably why they've fallen off. The Army, people don't look in the Army as professional as the other services, but it is. I mean, they absolutely know what it is to march. I mean, you heard of Jackson's Corps, the foot soldiers, and the foot cavalry is what they call them. The Army now can tell you how many steps to take in so many minutes to recreate that same forcing march, and they're professionals at it. They know how to do it. They know the weapons. They know all the stuff. And of course, now things are becoming more technical. So all the communication equipment that they have to have and understand and use, it's not just running around with a rifle in the woods. It's knowing how to use a computer, to launch a drone, to do all those other things. So the Nintendo set does have an advantage because they're used to that. All we have to do is get them in shape. That's the biggest challenge. What's amazing to me is we see the same thing that President Truman talked about when he was president, worried about the fact that people weren't capable of being in the military service for health reasons. And what you're talking about is true. There are some that just, they couldn't go to boot camp because they're overweight. They couldn't stand the stress of the physical activity that has to be taken care of in boot camp. And so they're not eligible to go in the service, unfortunately. So it's something that we as a country need to work on. And but I think the pay, one of the issues that Reagan ran on in 1980 was the fact that military pay was not very good. So you saw in the Reagan administration the defense buildup in the 1980s. One of the things that he did was we busted the all-volunteer force by raising the pay so that it was competitive to civilians on the other side. One of the things that we've done for the pilots, for example, I mean, you spend a lot of money training a pilot, and then he or she stays in for 7 or 8 years, and they say, hey, I'm going to the airlines. Well, we started giving them bonuses of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to stay in the service. Those kinds of things we have to do because it's actually a money savings because we don't have them going out to the airlines. What they don't realize, or what they do realize in some cases, is I can spend a 20-year career in the military, be a pilot, and get out and still fly for the airlines.
Right.
Airlines aren't as attractive as they used to be, but they're still pretty doggone attractive. It's still a fairly good vocation and pretty good salaries for those folks flying airplanes.
Well, and additionally, I think that you find in today's society, most families, especially once you start having children, most of them require two incomes. And so if you have someone that is going to stay in the military and retire from there, and I mean, I've had some people that, I mean, they're doing 30 years in the military, it can become challenging for the spouse to build a career knowing that they're going to move around. The active duty partner, their career goes, part of the transfer is part of what helps their career, but it kind of stifles the other person's career sometimes. And so, you know, compensating the military person so that this person, you know, so it equals out so that they're still able to take care of their families, and that's one less stressor, and they can be focusing on work also.
Well, one of the things that we've done, and I think successfully, is if you notice the service way back when Robert served in the Civil War, between now and then, is we have made the emphasis, particularly starting in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, we have put a lot more emphasis on family.
Yes.
The ombudsman program, which Francie particularly was very good at,
I was part of that
helping
as a Navy
those
one years
folks.
ago.
Yeah, it really makes a difference. And the states have gotten involved in this with a spousal program that recognizes qualifications. You know, a lady would be a spouse in Colorado and move to Virginia, and she'd have these qualifications for, let's say, a veterinary tech. Well, Virginia wouldn't accept her veterinary tech capability. She'd have to go get more classes and do, you know, take the test all over again. Well, we've changed all that now. If you look at the South Dakota advertisements, where the governor gets on and talks about, you know, how we're asking people to come up and we're going to recognize their professional capability, that's something that the states have done now, is to recognize the spouse's capabilities and what they bring to the state, and we recognize their capability and their licenses for professionalism. And I think that's something that's been important. So we put a lot more emphasis on families, and we needed to, because we have become a more family-oriented service than we were in the 1950s and 60s.
It's true.
Much more. You know, I mean, the families are so much more important now because they're growing, and you have a petty officer now that can afford. You know, one of the things that Francie did as a real estate agent here when she was doing real estate was she sold houses to first-class petty officers, an E6, and they could afford a small house here in Virginia Beach. It's a little tougher now, but, you know, that's the kind of thing you need to recognize and raise the pay so that they still can invest in a house if they're going to stay here for 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years, 6 or 7 years, depending on how long they're, you know, they can go from sea to shore here in Norfolk, which is a big base. That investment pays off, and it makes a difference now if they have the pay to afford that. And then you have the spouse, as you're talking about, that she's able to transfer her licenses and work here as successful as he does, or she, you know, a spouse situation, male or female, their licenses have transferred from Idaho or wherever they came from, or San Diego, to here, and now they can go right back to work, and that income keeps coming in, and they can afford a nice house here in Virginia Beach. A little tougher now because the prices have gone up on the houses.
Well, that's definitely true. And the ombudsman program, I'm sure all of them run a little bit differently, but the ones that I've been involved with were actually pretty impressive. I mean, I think it was a little bit less important for me because when I was married to someone active duty, I was still living in the area where I grew up, so I had a certain amount of family support. But obviously, a lot of my then husband's co-workers, their wives were from elsewhere. And I mean, we had wives softball leagues, and we had, you know, when they were deployed, you might have somebody who had a credit issue or a legal issue or some kind of financial issue, and everybody rallied. And even getting together to do things that weren't providing necessarily what might be considered essential services to some people. You know, there were single sailors who lived way across the country who didn't get to spend time with their families. So we rallied around to make sure that they were with somebody here, and we did gift baskets, and we did things when they deployed. And you might have a young Navy wife who's pregnant, first baby, and husband's going to be deployed for 6 months, and people rallied around helping you put the crib together and throwing baby showers and things like that, like I said, may not be considered essential to some people, but they go a real long way as far as morale goes and making people feel secure in that military community. And when your family life and your home life is straight, you're a better soldier, sailor, Marine, whatever branch you're in, because you don't have to worry about that. You have people rallying around to help, and it's an invaluable service. I would recommend anybody military connected to get involved with your ombudsman.
Yeah, it really makes a difference. Francie was both an ombudsman and she helped the ombudsman, because what was really neat, particularly in Japan, when I was commanding officer of a ship over there, all the girls knew her and knew that she was former military. So she had just retired out of the military service. So the ombudsman and the assistant ombudsman, you just latched onto her, and if there was any kind of problem with the base, Francie could solve that, and it made a huge difference. I never will forget, we had captain's call with the wives, which was, something you had to do. And one of the questions I got was, now, Captain, I'm due in 3 months. Are you going to send Jimmy back here for the birth of the baby? And I said, nope, he's not coming back. I said, if there's a problem, if you get sick during the pregnancy, yes, I'll send him or her back, to take care of you. But if you are having a normal pregnancy, he's not coming back. We have all these people here to help you, and particularly there was a neonatal capability there at Sasebo, even in Japan, and we pointed her to that, and they took care of her, and sure enough, she had the baby, and the baby was fine, and Jimmy came home, 2 months after the baby was born, and that's just the thing they had to expect. They didn't like that answer, but they understood. I said, I'm already short X number of personnel. Here we are, 4 deployed. Jimmy leaves, and I'm short another guy. Somebody else leaves because his father or mother is sick, and so on and so forth. I lose that capability. And remember, I'm a combat ship, and we don't know when we leave to go on a mission. We don't know what other mission might come up and what might happen. We don't know the things that are going to happen. So we have to be ready for all those. Losing Jimmy and Johnny and Susie, are going to be a problem.
So there is no, if you have to engage with an enemy, to say, time out, Jimmy had to be home, we're down a man.
Exactly. Yeah.
It just doesn't
or
work
Susie
that way.
had to go home because her husband, was, not going to have a baby, but had some other kind of problem. Those things happen, and you're going to have those, and you do the best you can with those. It's particularly harder overseas when you're forward deployed. That is another challenge, particularly if you have to send somebody home for death. We do that all the time, and of course the Red Cross gets involved in that, and the ombudsman, of course, would make sure. I had the most dramatic thing I had happen was I had a service member that an Australian officer that worked for me. Well, the squadron I had command of in San Diego had traditionally an Australian officer as part of the plans, which was a challenge in the computer side anyway, because of all the secret stuff that came over the computer. We had to put a separate computer room in. But he was a wonderful guy. His name was Henry Neeler, and he was a young guy in his 40s, very slim, but he had high blood pressure, and I never knew why. And of course, I assumed that the Australians had done some work up on him and done some of that. And he used to work out right about supper time, and he asked me, would it be okay if he came in late to supper every night, because we used to sit down at the same time. And I said, yeah, Henry, that's fine. You go work out and take a shower and come back, and you can, come in at 6:30. So he would do that every night. So one night, after we'd gone to Australia and he'd seen his parents, and we put the Australian flag up as we went into Sydney, Australia. It was a gorgeous moment on their national TV all over the place after Rocky Freedom. Henry was working out in the gym, had the Widowmaker collapse, I forget which artery it is, to his heart, and he died right there within, a few feet of where we were eating, and they were on top of him immediately, but he died, and we had to send his body back to Australia, and Francie had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go notify his wife, and then the ombudsman got involved in that. And the Australians to this day laud us for the capability and the care that we took of his wife when that happened. And it was a tremendous shock to all of us to have him collapse and die like that. After Iraqi freedom, we'd served in Iraqi freedom. It was a terrible thing.
Do we have a question?
No, an observation going back to when you were talking about the current generation behind computers and that. It's been reported that a study by the Department of Defense that because of obesity, adverse criminal history, physical problems, drug use, or lack of high school degree, only 23% of Americans are now qualified to serve in the military. That's 1 in 4. That is very frightening. And the other thing is, when they asked how likely is it you will serve in the military, only 11% stated that they would. Something's wrong with this country.
Wow.
Well, I think part of that, again, is I think we need to do a better job of advertising and come up with some unique programs. And of course, look at the pay. The 5% pay scale is going to make a difference. And emphasize the medical capabilities that they're going to get by being in service in the military. I think those things are important, and we just need to do a better job. Be all you can be, and the Marine Corps advertisements are, you need to see more of those and spend more money on that. And then I think the other programs, the programs that I think are very important here in our own neighborhood, are the NJRTC programs and the Army programs and the Air Force programs. Those are so important to show the young kids, what's going on in the services and introduce them to that at an early age, and I think it's important.
Yeah, generally speaking, the children that come out of those programs are pretty impressive. They're motivated, they're disciplined, and they're ready for whatever comes next after school. I would like to say I really do hope that we see more of a surge in military service and patriotism and wanting to serve. I think that there are many, many benefits to serving in the military. People have to want it, though. I hope that we do get back to some of the values that we had. I do want to, before we run out of time, I did neglect to say at the beginning, our shows do broadcast every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. and can be viewed on your Facebook page. I want to make 2 quick announcements. Next week's guest will be David Culpepper from the Virginia Beach School Board, and the next Tea Party meeting will be on August 10th, and the speaker will be John Lawson from Dominion Power, who will be discussing the windmill project. We just have about another minute and a half, but I wanted to see if Commodore Golden here had any parting comments before we end this evening.
Well, thank you for having me on, and for those of you that are former aviators, and you don't have to be a naval aviator, you can be a Marine Corps aviator or an Air Force aviator or Army. Today we had an Army Apache pilot, one of my friends, come to the meeting, and he enjoyed it thoroughly to listen to what the Navy guys were yakking about in helicopters. So we'd love to have you come join the Hampton Roads ANA, HRANA. We'd love to have you come and join, and we meet once a month, usually on about the second Wednesday of the month, and we're going to have a barbecue. I think it's on the 19th at the VFW 392 on Bolden Parkway here off London Bridge Road. So we'd love to see you there.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful organization. I hope people take you up on that invitation. I would also like to thank you and your lovely bride, Francie, and your wonderful daughter, Tara, for all of your service to our country and to the animals, because I'm an animal lover. We do look forward to hearing more about the 501c3.
Golden Paws, that's the organization.
Golden Paws. You can see Kenny driving the bus out there saving animals. And thank you so much for being our guest tonight, and we hope that we see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.